Oh, the tyranny. President Trump moves to take over law enforcement in Washington, D.C. to counter unchecked crime with a strong hand, and the left is losing their minds. Is this an unconstitutional power grab? Is it authoritarianism? Or is it exactly what half the country voted for? Welcome to Closing Argument.
4, 3, 2. Closing Argument with Walter Hudson.
This episode of Closing Argument is brought to you by Integrous Risk Solutions, providing affordable, on-demand security services with former military and law enforcement professionals. More details at the end of the show. Local control. It's long been a mantra on the right, the idea that government closest to the people is best suited to handle local matters like law enforcement and criminal justice. Our U.S. Constitution highly stresses the importance of state rights. The 10th Amendment reserves all powers not directly enumerated for the federal government to remain within the purview of the states. That presumably includes the police power, the ability to craft and enforce criminal law. Now, in theory, that should work beautifully. A rational people should demand rational laws from their state and local governments tailored to the unique cultural priorities of their jurisdictions. But something's happened in recent years that calls that wisdom into question. Some states, and certainly many of our largest cities, have made the conscientious decision to not enforce rational laws which protect the rights of our citizens. They let criminals go free. They refuse to prosecute. They intentionally bungle investigations to prevent criminal cases from moving forward. And they do it all informed by the cancerous ideology of critical race theory, which lifts the blindfold from Lady Justice's eyes and expects her to place a thumb on her scales to benefit minorities, particularly blacks. The result is an increasing number of new victims as a direct result of not holding offenders accountable. Here's an exchange I had during a bill presentation in the Minnesota House Public Safety Committee, which highlights this point.
This bill is really focused on punishment, and I just want to look at these types of considerations with a bigger lens.
We're talking about people. We're talking about victims. We're talking about perpetrators. We're talking about human beings doing things to other human beings that should not be done. And what are we going to do about that? And again, what this bill says is that when you get your third violent felony conviction, we're done. We're not playing anymore. I past that point, I don't know if I care if you ever become a productive citizen because you have opted out of productive society. Your third violent felony conviction? I don't know how interested I am in making sure you get educated and you get at that point, you're talking about a chronic dysfunction in a person's ability to be a member of society. And past that point, it is the responsibility of those of us who govern society to protect everyone else, to protect everyone who is functional, who isn't harming their neighbor, who isn't violating the rights of others. I'll give you some stats that I know are solid and that from a source that I know you trust. And I won't disclose the particulars of where I got this from, but I think you'll know when I tell you. I had a meeting this week with somebody who works with juveniles. And he presented me a folder that was about as thick as one of our statute books. The documents inside covered the crimes committed by only 6 juveniles. Those 6 juveniles over the course of the last 18 months are personally responsible for 174 separate victims. 174 separate human beings, real human beings, whose lives were touched in an inappropriate way by the actions of these kids. That's an average of 29 victims per kid. Now, at some point, our consideration properly should be the 174 as opposed to the 6, right? Like all the concern of the current trajectory and momentum of our public safety conversation in this state seems to be upon the 6. What do we do about the perpetrators? What do we do to make their lives better? What do we do to put them on the right track? What about the 174 victims who somehow figured it out? They somehow have managed to go through their lives without hurting other people and stealing from other people and harming other people. We're just going to let their rights be violated because we're so deeply concerned about the folks who are perpetrating against them. And look, there is a middle ground. I know I'm getting a little heated because I care about it. There is a bullseye somewhere between the restorative practices and trying to get people back to where they need to be in order to be productive members of society and actually protecting the public from the terrible things that these people are doing. And I would like to think that providing an enhanced penalty for somebody who has 3 violent felony convictions hits right in that bullseye.
This sort of governmental negligence is a serious problem. It directly violates the rights of law-abiding American citizens. When we think of tyranny, we usually picture something like 1984 or the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. We picture a boot of a soldier on the neck of an innocent civilian. But that's only one form of government tyranny, the active form, the conscientious decision to oppress. A far more prolific form of tyranny reigns across major American cities today, and that's what I call passive tyranny. That's when your local government decides that they're not going to uphold your right to the peaceful enjoyment of your property. When they decide that the well-being of criminals is more important than your well-being and that of your family. Those 174 victims I referenced in the committee hearing, the vast majority of them did not have to be victims. They could have been protected by keeping their offenders off the street. And that's the foremost job of government. The entire reason why government exists is to uphold our rights as individuals, especially the right to live our lives without being accosted by those who would harm and steal from us. And when government fails to do that, it proves every bit as tyrannical as if it were the one doing the harming and the stealing. That is passive tyranny. It's the conscientious decision to not protect the innocent from the predations of the guilty. And it's just as heinous, immoral, and despicable as active forms of tyranny. And yet, that's become the policy of major American cities in recent years to prioritize statistical racial disparities over justice in individual cases. A prime example of this is Washington, D.C., where the homicide rate remains elevated at about 15 per 100,000 residents, 100 homicides year to date, far above the national average of around 5 per 100,000. Carjackings, often involving juveniles and firearms, surged to over 900 in 2023. Assaults with dangerous weapons are 536 year to date, and robberies are 899 year to date, all disrupting daily life and certainly impacting the ability of residents to peacefully enjoy themselves. And these aren't isolated. They've included high-profile incidents like the carjacking of a former Doge staffer, the murder of a congressional intern, and an assault on a House Democrat, directly impacting federal personnel and operations. Now, the left and the mainstream media argue that crime rates have gone down in the short term, but that's not the standard. We shouldn't measure success with an endpoint fallacy. 536 assaults with a dangerous weapon, 899 robberies, and that's just this year, and the year isn't even over? That's not acceptable. No one should have to endure that. And so that's why President Trump has moved to take federal control of Washington, D.C.'s police department. Now, this move has prompted a panic on the left and in the mainstream media. Commentators like my own Minnesota Governor Tim Walz call the move authoritarian. But what does he mean by that? Who is the object of Trump's so-called authoritarianism in this case? Is it law-abiding American citizens? No. They have nothing to fear from a crackdown on street crime in Washington, D.C. or any other American city. Is it the criminals themselves? Again, no. Enforcing the law against crimes is not an act of authoritarianism. So what the hell is Walz talking about? What are other commentators referring to when they evoke the authoritarian label? Well, what we're seeing here is another example of Democrats conveniently embracing the Constitution and concepts like federalism and local control only when it benefits their skewed ideological agenda. The argument is that local jurisdictions ought to be able to determine their own law enforcement policies and prosecutorial decisions without interference from the federal government. And normally, that would be true. But just as in the lead up to the Civil War, it was theoretically true that the federal government had no jurisdiction over chattel slavery in the southern states, indeed, to this very day, defenders of the Confederacy and haters of President Lincoln continue to describe him as a tyrant. They refer to the Civil War as the War of Northern Aggression and argued that the Union had no right to interfere in the internal affairs of southern states. In light of that, I find it tremendously ironic that that same line echoes today in 2025, where you have Democrats, just like in the 1860s, arguing that states and local jurisdictions have the right to do whatever they want, no matter the impact upon the rights of American citizens within their borders. But sovereignty is a tricky thing. Sovereignty begins with the individual. That's the quintessential American idea. A person is sovereign, created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. The sovereignty of a government is derived entirely from the sovereignty of individuals. That's why King George had no moral claim of sovereignty over the colonies that rebelled against him, because he did not uphold the individual sovereignty of his subjects in the New World or the collective sovereignty of the colonies they established. Put simply, you don't get to be a sovereign over others. You get to be a sovereign by the consent of others, and only to the extent that you uphold their individual sovereignty in trust. That means, as an elected official, as a representative form of government, as a republic, your power is constrained by the rights of your citizens. That's the fundamental American idea. And that means government has a duty to uphold individual sovereignty as it resolves in individual rights, and as the Declaration of Independence states, most likely to affect the people's safety and happiness. In 1860, this meant that the southern states' claim to sovereignty was undermined by their systemic violations of the rights of black slaves. A state that violates the rights of its own people or the rights of neighbors loses any legitimate claim to sovereignty. That's why the Allies bombed Germany and Japan in World War II. Nobody was arguing back then that it was somehow a violation of German and Japanese sovereignty to war against them, bringing them to heel and forcing reforms after the war, because both Germany and Japan lost their moral claim to sovereignty when they acted to violate the rights of others, both within their own borders and abroad. The same was true of the southern states in 1860. You don't get to appeal to state sovereignty while you're holding slaves. That argument doesn't hold water because your state sovereignty is derived from the individual sovereignty of the people within your borders. Similarly, today, Washington, D.C. cannot appeal to their sovereignty as a local unit of government as a reason why the feds shouldn't act to uphold the rights of law-abiding citizens within the district. If the city of Washington, D.C. is going to engage in the passive tyranny of allowing unchecked crime, effectively violating the individual sovereignty of American citizens who live and visit there, then they've lost any moral claim to retain control over their jurisdiction. That's how this works. And it's consistent with the moral underpinnings of both the Civil War, World War II, and every other just incursion on a local jurisdiction throughout history. Now, the left is panicking because Trump hints he may take similar action in other U.S. cities around the nation. He named New York City, Baltimore, and Oakland as examples. And people are freaking out, suddenly rushing to their newfound libertarian local government principles, which only ever manifest when someone like Trump wants to do something that actually benefits American citizens. But they don't have a leg to stand on. I have a right to travel the streets of Minneapolis without rational fear that I'll be assaulted or robbed. I have the right to take my family to downtown without worrying about their safety. And the residents of Minneapolis have a right to the peaceful enjoyment of their property without having to fend off incursions from vagrants and criminals. That's the responsibility of the city of Minneapolis. It's the only reason they exist, to effect that. There's no other reason for them to be a thing. Maintaining law and order is the entirety of the reason for their existence. Everything else they do is subordinate to that. And they're failing. Recent headlines highlight a spree of smash and grabs affecting over 120 vehicle owners in Minneapolis in one night alone. None of those victims deserve to be victimized. None of their perpetrators deserve to be on the street. And it's the responsibility of the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County to prioritize those victims over their perpetrators. But they don't. And because they don't, their moral grasp on any claim to local sovereignty is weakened. Minneapolis has a responsibility not just to their own residents, but to the rest of the state, especially the surrounding suburbs, to keep crime in check. Their failure to do so is, in effect, an attack upon law-abiding citizens. And again, we're talking about passive tyranny, allowing the violation of rights when it's your job to respond effectively. So if President Trump wants to intervene in a city like Minneapolis to uphold the rights of American citizens, or if a future Republican administration in Minnesota wants to preempt the abhorrent policies of Minneapolis in order to combat crime, it's not a violation of local sovereignty. It's the restoration of individual sovereignty, which is the source of all sovereignty. It's not an imposition upon local control, it's the restoration of true local control. Just because you're a local doesn't mean you get to abdicate your responsibilities. It doesn't mean you get to enslave people. It doesn't mean you get to invade. It doesn't mean you get to allow unchecked crime, which affects law-abiding citizens within your jurisdiction and everywhere else. If you won't take your local responsibilities seriously, then you will and should be displaced. The object of all governments is to uphold individual rights. Everything else is window dressing. Before we wrap up today's episode, let's talk about protecting what matters most, your safety at home, work, or wherever life takes you. This episode was brought to you by Integrous Risk Solutions. Now, we live in a time where law enforcement is under assault from every direction. In the Twin Cities and beyond, agencies are understaffed, under-resourced, unappreciated, and unsupported. This creates a gap that needs to be filled. Fortunately, Integrous Risk Solutions is much more than your average private security company. They only employ former military and law enforcement personnel. They have access to state-of-the-art counterintelligence, a canine unit that can detect firearms and explosives, camera monitoring, executive protection, and much, much more. And before you think that sounds like too much to afford, give them a call. You'd be surprised how affordable on-demand security services can be, especially compared to the cost of increased insurance rates and maintenance expenses. Here's a short glimpse at what you get with Integrous Risk Solutions.
Our agents receive extra training over, way and above the state minimum standards in order to be able to respond to any issues and be able to handle all situations.
In an uncertain world today, Integrous can provide solutions to help put a little certainty back into our daily lives.
Law enforcement used to provide resource officer positions throughout a series of schools and rotate around providing security. Now they're so short-staffed that they're having a really hard time covering schools. It doesn't need to come to where we have an active shooter for them to take steps to privatize security within the school so they can fill those security gaps.
Integrous Risk Solutions ownership is comprised of a combination of a former special operations sergeant, assistant fire chief, federal law enforcement officer, former Army officer. That unique combination has allowed us to provide solution to various clients.
Our agents are level-headed, they're able to de-escalate when they need to, and they know when to act and when to be still. That's the Integrous difference.
We'll get into training, providing active shooter training, employee and staff training when it comes to dealing with a situation that arises turns into a 911 call all the way through the solution or resolution of that situation.
We believe that in Integrous, we're a family. It's important who we hire and who we have working with us. If it wasn't for the agents up, that's who makes Integrous.
They're not just there to be a guy with a gun or a girl with a weapon. It's to provide security and protection for the people, but also safety.
We've seen in the industry that training is where it lacks. That's the money that most people spare, is training on the employees. Our employees are our investment. And so we want to invest as much training, as quality training as we can, because a better trained employee can respond to a situation more methodically with a clear head.
Final product of that is a superior service to our client. And again, with integrity and being transparent, and to our client, both to our agents and our client, that family sense and that pride in our training and bettering ourselves daily, we're providing top level quality to our clients.
We can support after-school events such as basketball, football games, proms, off-site proms. It doesn't matter what it is. And we have the ability to scale and provide the number of security staff members that are needed for each event.
And we keep getting hired back again and again and again because of our honesty and our ability to perform.
If you're a business owner, live in an HOA, administer a school district, or just need a customized security solution, Integrous Risk Solutions is here for you. Contact me at whudson@integrousrisksolutions.com or call 763-445-9482 to set up a no-pressure consultation. We don't want to sell you something you don't need, but we'll provide affordable options to meet your actual needs. Again, that's whudson@integrousrisksolutions.com or 763-445-9482. Stay safe out there. That's it for today. For X subscribers, YouTube channel members, and audio podcast subscribers, be sure to check out my supporter-exclusive bonus shows, The Smoke-Filled Room, where I get more personal and cover a broader range of topics. YouTube members also get early access to new videos. Join now for immediate access. Take care.